The ingredients listed on your morning latte are missing a few historical items: smuggling, espionage, execution, and slavery. Over 2 billion cups are consumed every single day. The global industry generates more annual revenue than the GDP of most nations, making it the second most traded physical commodity on Earth. Tracing how an isolated wild berry found its way into billions of kitchens follows a history of economic pursuit that reshaped the economies of entire continents. The trail starts in the forested highlands of 9th century Ethiopia. According to historical legend, a young goat herder named Kaldi noticed his flock acting erratically, jumping, bleating, and refusing to sleep after grazing on a shrub covered in bright red berries. He ate the berries himself and felt an immediate rush of energy. Long before anyone thought to brew a liquid, indigenous communities in the region crushed these berries and mixed them with animal fat to create a dense energy paste. It was only later that local monks supposedly threw the berries into a fire, smelled the intoxicating aroma of the roasting seeds, and dissolved the crushed powder in hot water. Word of this stimulant traveled across the Red Sea. By the 15th century, Sufi monks in Yemen were using the brewed drink, which they called kahwa, as a specific physiological tool. It allowed them to stay awake through long nights of chanting rituals and religious devotion. Recognizing the demand, Yemen turned the wild plant into a structured agricultural crop, growing it on terraced hillsides. They routed every single bean leaving the Arabian Peninsula through a single port city on the Red Sea coast, Mocha. To protect their total control over the supply chain, Yemeni authorities enforced strict security measures. They boiled or partially roasted every bean before export, ensuring that foreign buyers received a product for consumption, but never a viable seed they could plant themselves. Controlling a highly desirable, mind-altering crop gave Yemen absolute leverage over foreign markets. That level of centralized wealth meant a live coffee plant quickly became the ultimate target for international theft. By the early 1500s, the beverage poured into the Ottoman Empire. Cities like Istanbul and Cairo saw the sudden rise of coffee houses. These were loud, smoke-filled social hubs where men gathered to play backgammon, listen to storytellers, and socialize. This terrified ruling authorities. When ordinary citizens sit together in large numbers with a stimulant in their systems, they begin talking openly about politics and gossiping about the Sultan and his court. The paranoia reached its peak in the 1630s under Sultan Murad IV. He shut down every coffee house in Istanbul and outlawed the drink entirely. Historical accounts even describe him wandering the streets at night in disguise, personally executing anyone caught drinking coffee in the act. As trade routes carried the beans into Europe, the panic followed. Priests in Rome lobbied the Vatican to ban the dark, exotic liquid as a corrupting influence on Christian souls. The campaign ended abruptly when Pope Clement VIII asked for a taste. Finding it delicious, he formally baptized it instead, granting papal approval. Soon, London had thousands of coffee houses, earning the nickname penny universities. For the price of a single cup, sailors, writers, and scientists could sit down and debate natural science or colonial politics. The conversations at Jonathan's Coffee House laid the physical foundation for the London Stock Exchange. Coffee acted as a catalyst for free thought and social disruption that political authorities simply could not contain. To see how Yemen's strict embargo finally collapsed, we follow the shipping routes. In 1616, a Dutch trader managed to steal a live plant from the port of Mocha, smuggling it back to Amsterdam. The Dutch East India Company cultivated it in their botanical gardens and then mass-planted it in their overseas territory of Java. France aggressively pursued their own supply. In 1723, a French naval officer named Gabriel Descleux took a single glass-encased cutting and set sail for the Caribbean island of Martinique. Surviving pirate attacks and rationing his own drinking water to keep the small tree alive, he arrived with a single specimen that would eventually populate the French Caribbean. 4 years later, the Portuguese government in Brazil wanted access. They sent Francisco de Melo Paeta on a diplomatic mission to neighboring French Guiana. Through espionage and an alleged affair with the French governor's wife, he secured fertile seeds hidden inside a farewell bouquet of flowers and brought them south across the border. These 3 isolated acts of colonial smuggling ended Yemen's monopoly. They moved the center of global agricultural power to the Western Hemisphere, making the Americas the primary source of the world's supply. Meeting the exploding European demand required millions of acres of tropical land and an unimaginable volume of manual labor. Colonial empires built immense plantation systems, overwhelmingly reliant on the brutal subjugation of enslaved Africans and indigenous people. In territories like the French Caribbean and the sprawling estates of Brazil, plantation owners ran the numbers. They calculated it was cheaper to force enslaved laborers to work from before dawn to dusk, harvesting and processing cherries by hand until they died, and simply purchase replacements from the transatlantic slave trade than to provide basic food or shelter. The intellectual enlightenment, political debates, and social freedoms enjoyed in the penny universities of London and the cafes of Paris were heavily subsidized. The wealth they generated was entirely funded by the enslavement and suffering of millions of people across the colonial tropics. Across the Atlantic, political protests dictated what went into the cup. In 1773, American colonists dumped British East India Company tea into Boston Harbor to protest taxation without representation. Drinking tea became unpatriotic overnight, forcing organizers of the independence movement to adopt coffee as their default beverage. By the 19th century, technological advancements scaled that habit. Steam-powered ships reduced transatlantic freight costs, industrial roasters processed beans by the ton, and vacuum-sealed tin packaging extended shelf life. Coffee moved from an elite luxury to an affordable staple for factory workers. Look at this camp setting from the American Civil War. Union soldiers were issued coffee beans as part of their daily field rations. They carried personal grinders in their packs and roasted green beans over campfires in their tin cups. It provided a reliable daily stimulant and a strategic morale advantage over Confederate forces, cut off by blockades and reduced to brewing roasted sweet potatoes. The world wars of the 20th century cemented this integration. We see the mass distribution of coffee directly into military logistics, with the government securing huge contracts with companies like Nescafé and Maxwell House to supply millions of instant coffee packets to troops. Returning soldiers brought this standardized daily habit back to their new suburban homes. The American military-industrial complex rebranded coffee as a standardized daily fuel for the masses, a cultural shift that would define its consumption for decades. But scaling up production came with a consequence. By the 1970s, as consumers browsed grocery store aisles like this one, large corporate roasters were aggressively cutting corners. They blended lower-grade Robusta beans and prioritized shelf life over flavor, resulting in a weak, bitter product that pushed per capita consumption into a steep decline. In 1971, three friends in Seattle attempted to correct this by opening a small shop called Starbucks. Their initial focus was entirely educational, selling high-quality, whole-roasted beans and brewing equipment to customers. A young marketing director named Howard Schultz recognized a larger opportunity. Following a trip to Milan in 1983, Schultz observed the theater and community built into Italian espresso bars. He bought the Starbucks brand and transformed it from a niche bean retailer into a sprawling cafe chain, successfully commercializing the European coffeehouse experience for the American public. This mainstream success created space for the third wave movement. Independent roasters began sourcing single-origin beans directly from farms in Ethiopia and Colombia, prioritizing the agricultural profile of the plant and treating the beverage with a level of scrutiny previously reserved for wine. Look at the massive mechanized harvesters dominating the fields today. They reflect an industry that generates over $400 billion in annual revenue. More than 125 million people across 70 tropical nations depend on coffee farming for their livelihoods, with Brazil consistently dominating global output. When you pour a cup tomorrow morning, you are consuming 5 centuries of human greed, political revolution, and ingenuity distilled into a single globalized commodity.